Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I am Matt Kaplan of the Planetary Society, the host of Planetary Radio, and I am delighted to join you for another one of these periodic or semi-annual advocacy updates. We are very happy to have you on board, and joining me today will be the real experts in the Planetary Society. Casey Dreier, you can see on your screen right now. He is the Chief Advocate of the Planetary Society. We can also, and Brendan and Bill, if you are around still, and I see that you are listed among our participants, go ahead. Bill, I had muted your microphone and webcam, so you'll have to reactivate those. Bill Nye, Brendan, and Brendan Curry, our man in Washington. Hello, Brendan. Great to see you. Are all joining us remotely. Brendan from his home. Are you inside or outside the Beltway, Brendan?
4 miles outside the Beltway.
Okay. And I didn't hear you in my headphones. I'm wondering why. But now, maybe I will now that I've turned it up a little bit. Hello. And Bill Nye, the CEO of the Planetary Society, is with us. Welcome, Bill.
Good to see you all.
So here we are for another one of these, as I said, semi-annual updates. I'm at Planetary Society headquarters, and we have a full agenda of items to talk with you about, but we also, as always, also look forward to taking your questions and comments, and we already have some of these coming in. We are very happy to see all of you having joined us again today, and most of all, we thank you for the support that you have provided to enable all of us, particularly in what you see right now, Casey and Brendan, to continue their amazingly successful advocacy work, not just on our behalf, not just on behalf of the Planetary Society, but on behalf of everybody who is interested in seeing space science and space development move forward. And we'll be hearing about some of those successes from Casey in just a moment. We're assuming that all of you are already members of the Planetary Society. If you're not, by the way, planetary.org/membership is the place to go so that you can join us and become part of this organization in yet another way. But we are especially grateful to you for the support that you have already provided. And we are going to be trying to take your questions pretty regularly. We're not going to hold off. We're going to take them throughout the program today, and we will go for at least an hour, and we may go even a little bit beyond that if we're continuing to see lots of interest and activity. But Casey, I want to turn to you to welcome everybody and maybe bring us up to date on something else, another opportunity that people have that's coming up early next year.
Thank you, Matt, and I hope I'm coming through okay. Is that true?
Yes, looks like you are.
Wonderful. And again, thank you again, just to reiterate what Matt said. We are so just happy to not just be speaking with you today, but to be engaging with you throughout the year. Again, so I'm the Chief Advocate here at the Planetary Society, as you probably know. Brendan Curry does all of our DC operations, and I hope most of you know Bill Nye, who tells us what to do. And then, of course, Matt, who I co-host the podcast with. And again, advocacy and policy is one of the real, I think, unique aspects of what we do here at the Planetary Society, and trying to give you an opportunity to get more of a one-on-one access and discussion with us to hear what you're interested in, and then what we like to talk about, obviously, is just fascinating for us. So again, thank you for coming today, and thank you for your ongoing support. Something that we've been trying to do at the Planetary Society the last few years has been to invest in this program to make it more effective, and also give you as a member and supporter more to do, and to kind of give you pathways to empower yourself and to take direct action in support of something that we all, I assume, share, which is the love of space exploration, space science, and discovery. And to that end, we've been investing in this annual day of action. This is when we have Planetary Society members from across the United States come to Washington, D.C. to do in-person advocacy, basically, with their representatives and other key members of Congress and their staff. This is something that isn't just something we like to do, doesn't just make you feel good. Studies have shown repeatedly that this is the most effective action an individual can take, is to meet with their representative of Congress in person in Washington, D.C. This is something that we take very seriously, And to that end, we've been investing in our infrastructure for this, so that we've been trying to increase the number of Planetary Society members attending, trying to make it more of an event that is not just meeting with members of Congress, but meeting each other, developing ongoing relationships, and getting the joy of kind of being able to speak passionately about something you care about and making that an effective thing. So this day of action, we're doing it again in 2020, February 9th and 10th. 9th is a training day, 10th is the full day of action. We're expanding it this year, so if you can't come to Washington, D.C., there will be ways for you to pledge to take action remotely in order to support those who will be there. And this will give more of a global participatory action to our entire membership in order to support the people who will make the great time and financial sacrifice to come all the way to Washington, D.C., and really stand up and be that top tier space advocate, working on behalf of the Planetary Society and its fellow members. So that's a really exciting thing. You can learn more about this at planetary.org/day of action. If you haven't been before, check it out. We have lots of testimonials, videos, interviews with people who've been there. Everyone that has participated generally has such a fantastic experience and walks out of there actually not just enjoying what they did, but they tend to feel better about the political system in general. Which is, we can use every moment like that these days, I would say.
Thanks, Casey. Bill, do you want to welcome folks?
No. Yes, welcome. That was irony. Yes, welcome. So we just had the International Astronautical Congress in Washington. And you really see how important NASA is and how important the United States is in leadership in space, but along with that, you see how many other countries, how many other agencies, how many other people from around the world are involved. And I claim the Planetary Society is unique in that way, in that we engage people from all over. But this day of action is really a cool thing. And I hope as many of you who are listening as possible can come. I have some specific things I want to talk to our advocacy people about when it's my turn. So keep going, Matt. I want to hear from our members and members of the community and members of the society.
You're the boss. It's always your turn.
Sure. That's the way to win friends and influence people.
Brendan, I want to hear from you as well, but
Yeah,
do me a favor first, old TV guy that I am. Tilt your camera, your webcam down a little bit if you can, so we have that's better.
There we go. That's what I'm talking about.
Brendan, you are in the your home office, right? Which also happens to be the DC office of the Planetary Society.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, no. I just want to echo Casey's points. For those of you who may be new to you on this call, I did 7.5 years on Capitol Hill as a congressional staffer, and Casey's.
And look, everybody, he's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And Casey's 100% correct. When you're a congressional staffer and you have constituents come into your office and say, I care about A, B, C, and D, that really does resonate with a congressional staffer, as opposed to when a congressional staffer has to have almost a weekly meeting with some hired gun lobbyist about whatever they're getting paid to do. It resonates, and you go and you tell the senator you work for or the congressman you work for, these people are voters, and they came in to passionately talk about an issue they care about. And I cannot overstate how important the day of action is. I was always on the receiving end of that kind of stuff, and to work with Casey this past year and in gearing up for the next one, it's actually more fun being on the other side with the advocates. You just can't put a dollar figure on it. And there's other space organizations in DC that don't even have as many people come in as we do. And in some cases, they have to subsidize these people coming in, and we're unable to do that. And we can't do that. And in some ways, that helps puts an exclamation point on what we do here and what
It's
you.
authentic.
Yes, precisely. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes.
Casey, I'm hoping that you will, in a moment or two, be able to give us, start us really into the meat of the program by giving us a status report on how well we're doing toward our stated goals. But we do have questions coming in. We received one a couple of days ago from Robert Watkins Jr. And if you guys don't mind, I'm going to get to that now. But for the rest of you, as you can probably see, if you have the chat window open on your screen, we do have your colleagues and support of the advocacy effort here at the Planetary Society who are checking in, giving us their questions. You are welcome, and we encourage you to put your questions and comments in there in the chat window as well, and we will get to as many of these as we can. But here's what we got from Robert Watkins. As we approach the epoch of humans living in space, how do we prepare as a society to venture into the stars? Should be easy to answer. Currently, I have noticed that there is a very narrow window of opportunity to train for, least of all, make a career of venturing to space. How can we not only increase the operational window, but also increase the degree of participation from the public into space? And I'm going to skip down. He says, thank you again for your time and consideration of these matters at hand. I look forward to hearing from you in the near future. Well, the future is now, Robert. Thank you for your question. Anybody want to respond to that philosophical
Sure.
but still practical question?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think that there's one core aspect of this that resonates with me in that question, which is that I firmly believe, and I think everyone here would believe, that we're actually standing in a very exciting time in space exploration that has no precedent in history. And we're in the midst of a major transition, not just in human spaceflight, but obviously with this growing, burgeoning, and yet unknown consequences from the commercial sector and private sector coming into spaceflight. No one knows how this is going to turn out. And my kind of gut instinct tells me we're either at a significant bifurcation where history will change in the next decade, or we're one recession away from it collapsing back to the norm. And we don't know how that's going to happen yet.
What do you mean by the norm? What do you mean by the norm?
On how many people participate within that new system. And so, to the specific point in terms of human participation, I think we're going to see slow encroachment of more people entering space, mainly as tourists, but that will honestly be a domain of the super rich to begin with, just because of the financial requirements of such an aspect of it. What we're also seeing, I think, is a greater participation through people through robotic participation or a commercial sector economy, where people can not just be space fans or space advocates, but they can now be space entrepreneurs. And so what we need to do as a society is find ways that everyone can participate and make it relevant to everybody. You can look back into the history of NASA and its history of not building an inclusionary, basically, space program, left it adrift politically when the moon program functionally ended, and it had very limited support throughout the public because a lot of people felt it had nothing to do with them. So the greatest thing we can do is find ways to integrate everybody in our society to find a place for them, whether it's going into space, whether it's supporting space, whether it's just enjoying the images and understanding the great motivation of why we do it. And this really touches in with what the Planetary Society at its core tries to do, which is to give a place in space for everybody and to have space for everybody to feel that this is something that engages them and not something that is just a domain of billionaires building rockets.
If I may jump in real quick.
Of course.
Recently when Bill and Casey were in town, we had our friends from APL for dinner. They had these awesome Europa Clipper mission shirts. I said, how do you get that? They said, oh, we've cut a deal with Land's End. Anyone can go on and buy a Europa Clipper mission logo shirt. And so they get it to what Casey's talking about, is that Christmas is coming up. Maybe you want to get a Europa Clipper shirt for your dad or something like that, So,
or a Planetary Society shirt or ball cap.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
But this notion of the democratization of space is really taking hold in Washington, and 20 years ago, the idea of sending people back to the moon or jeepers going to Mars was laughed at. And now it's serious, serious points of discussion. I think speaks very well of where we are as an industry and as a community.
Thank you, guys. Casey, please bring us up to date. What is the status of our advocacy activity?
I'd be happy to do that, Matt.
And
you may have to
let me ask
share my...
folks, please keep your microphones muted, please, and I'll try and monitor that from here as well. Casey, it's all yours.
Matt, I may need you to share your screen with the slides I sent you. I don't have an option to share the slides on this end, unless you make me a presenter, I believe.
Oh, okay. I'll have to dig those up. Did you just send them?
I've emailed them to you, yeah. And I can begin.
Okay, let me see if I can pull those
it.
up. But if you can go ahead, feel free to start.
Certainly. So while we get our visual aid here, I just wanted to just very quickly touch on some of the major initiatives that we were working on here at the Planetary Society in this year and give a little bit of a status update on what progress has happened towards those. So I went back, this is for our day of action earlier this year, back in March. We listed out some of the top goals for our members within, coming from the Planetary Society to share with Congress. These reflected the organizational priorities that Brendan and I have been working on this past fiscal year, really, even beyond that, before the day of action, and identified 4 major issues. And I can give a very brief update on each one, and depending on the questions, I'm happy, and all of us are happy to dig down into them further as well. So the first issue, or 4 main issues, let's say. The first, of course, is to grow NASA's budget. That is the baseline of all fundamental success here, that NASA needs the resources to do the job that we're asking it to do, not just as a nation, but as the world leading space agency. So we had proposed a few years ago a 5-over-5 plan, raise NASA's budget by 5% per year for 5 years. That would grow NASA up to about $24 billion by the end of 2022. I'm happy to say on that front, we have actually seen average of 4.1% growth in that period, and we're facing right now, both House and Senate, approximately 5% growth again. So this is one of those things that we have been very successful in, that it's NASA's growing, or it stands ready to grow at the rate that we recommended. Additionally, beyond that, we wanted to tie into major important aspects of missions, planetary exploration for us. Mars sample return has been a major focus for our organization. This goes back decades, sending a mission to Mars, grab samples from the surface, bring it back. We're in a partial success there where NASA has provided early study money for the program, but is so far somewhat slow walking that mission. So this remains an area that we continue to focus on quite a bit, as that mission, which is going to be expensive and complicated, is going to require a large coalition and ongoing financial commitment in order to make that successful within a near-term time frame. I should say that Mars 2020 has we'll take the first step in that. It will collect the samples we need now to go back and get them. The European Space Agency stands ready, and it looks promising, to commit a substantial amount of resources to a partnership with NASA to pursue this mission. We will learn more about that, there we go, in the upcoming ESA ministerial here at the end of November. And we're hoping for at least a 1.5 to 2 billion euro commitment over the next 10 years. Thank you, Matt. I'll start here just to highlight something that I was going to show to all of you, that, at the Planetary Society, if you haven't seen it, we do have a relatively new strategic plan, and we have 3 core enterprises outlined in that plan, and that's to find life, explore worlds, and to defend the Earth. All of these big ideas influence what Brendan and I focus on here at the Advocacy and Policy program. And to go forward one, Matt. And just to highlight again, some of the specific items that we work on tie in directly to these core enterprises. So for finding life, we're really focused on Mars sample return and Europa Clipper right now. Explore worlds, getting humans to Mars and maintaining Mars as the goal for human spaceflight, another one of our major goals this year. Obviously, enabling resources through the NASA budget, planetary science, and of course, Mars sample return also fits in the exploration of the worlds. And then defending Earth through planetary defense, preventing large objects and asteroids from hitting us from outer space, and really focusing this year on a ground-based telescope, or sorry, I should say a space-based telescope to search for near-Earth objects. So again, these what we work on tie directly back to these core enterprises that we focus on at the Planetary Society, and that informs our overall focus and prioritization in space exploration in our advocacy and policy program. Matt, if you could go forward another slide, please. So again, these goals for 2019 that we worked on, this is growing NASA 5%, Mars sample return, also ensuring that Mars remains a priority within human spaceflight. All of the focus obviously right now is on the moon, but how do you maintain Mars as the ultimate goal within that context? And this is going to be a very important aspect as the needs of the Artemis program and the lunar exploration program increase and the problems multiply just as a function of doing something hard like landing people on the moon. It's going to be very easy to focus on moon-specific solutions to broad human spaceflight problems. And what we need to do is encourage NASA and international partners to maintain an open architecture for long-term Mars exploration so that every solution that they implement from lunar exploration feeds directly into long-term goals of human spaceflight from Mars. And then, of course, I mentioned the Planetary Defense Space-Based Telescope as another major issue for planetary defense policy. And then a more specific and practical function is growing and nurturing the Planetary Science Caucus that we helped start last year. And I'll let Brendan talk about that in just a second. If you can go one more slide, Matt. So I had kind of a quick status check marks here for these primary activities in 2019. This is for this last calendar year, 2019, and a few months before. So again, I mentioned growing NASA to 5%. We're very good point that with the House and the Senate and the White House basically all agreeing on a 5% boost. We haven't finalized this budget yet. We can talk about that going forward, but all signs point to yes, basically, that this is going to happen if we can get a budget this year. That's very good. So that's a green checkbox for us. We're very happy with that outcome. Mars as the goal of human spaceflight. This has been this is going to be an ongoing problem. It's easier to say now than it is going to be to implement in the future. So this is kind of a temporary, I'd say, green star. But fortunately for us, the President of the United States has actually maintained a very strong awareness and focus of Mars for human spaceflight, even as his administration puts a lot of focus into a 2024 lunar landing deadline. And you've seen the rhetoric change at NASA and within the executive branch as the president has talked ongoing about Mars exploration. And this has really helped, I think, remind everyone that this lunar project is not just to the moon, it's going to go beyond. Probably the most important concrete step was that this year, NASA has stated that it will commit to building a space-based telescope to search for near-Earth objects. This is something that we've been mainly working on background, quietly behind the scenes for the last 2 to 3 years at this point. And getting NASA to finally commit to this is a huge deal because it's not just the fact that they're going to build a telescope, they're committing to an ongoing mission flight line to build planetary defense, basically small to medium class planetary defense spacecraft missions. That has never happened at NASA before, and the expansion of that program to include flight missions is a huge step that will be hard to undo. So this is a long-term, ongoing, fundamental change into the core responsibilities of the space program here in the United States, and we're very excited to see this. And the first mission being, of course, DART, the Double Asteroid Redirect Mission test, and now the NEO surveillance mission, which is used to be NEOCAM. We can talk about that if you'd like, but basically they will build the spacecraft. Very exciting. Of course, I mentioned Mars sample return. We have study money. We're waiting on this next budget to provide more funding for it to get it started. We're also waiting for the international partners to come in and fundamentally commit. So things are aligning, but not yet there yet. So we have a half checkbox on that. So those, I think, very happy and very pleased with our progress and our goals this year. Again, this is enabled the fact that Brendan is out there every day working on behalf of you. I'm working on behalf of you. And everything that we're doing here at the Society, all of that enabling function comes from you, right? Without your presence, support, donations, and engagement, we would have nothing. We don't have corporate sponsors to come and fund our advocacy program. We don't represent large corporate interest or government interest here. This is purely a function of expressing your interests and values as Planetary Society members and supporters. And that gives us that edge, but it also makes us completely dependent on you. So I'm very grateful for that ongoing support that you've shown us. So those are the quick highlights and feedback on our goals and successes this year. I have a few backup slides. If you want to just pull up that one more final slide next there, Matt, I can let Brendan talk
Casey,
about.
I goofed. I thought you were done since I hadn't seen those, and I'd have to pull them back up again. But can we pause for a moment and see if Brendan or Bill have any comments? And then we
Well, I
do
was
have a
going to turn
question,
over to, I have a picture of
related
the
question.
Planetary Science Caucus, but yeah, let's let Brendan talk about the caucus development. That was the other major issue this year.
Sure. Brendan?
Yeah, well, in Congress, there are these things called caucuses. You often hear about congressional committees, and they're the ones that do oversight. They essentially cut the checks for the government to execute whatever it is. But there are these things called caucuses where you have a bunch of like-minded members of Congress who care about something, and they come together, and it doesn't matter if they're Republican or Democrat. I always, there's a hunting and fishing caucus, believe it or not. And we have this thing called the Planetary Science Caucus, and it's the co-chairs are Derek Kilmer, a Democrat, and Stephen Palazzo, a Republican. And they may not agree on much, but the one thing they care about is space exploration. And so we right now, and both those members are important because they're what are called appropriators. They sit on the House Appropriations Committee, which really does fund the government, or supposed to fund the government. And we've developed this relationship with them, and we have 41 members from the House and the Senate, Republicans and Democrats, who, one of the nice things about space is that despite how heated the political rhetoric gets in Washington, there are a few issues that people can kind of coalesce and care about and work together on, and blessedly one of those is space. And so that's what this caucus is about. And in late September, we had Bill come into town, and we worked with our friends at APL, the Applied Physics Lab, to do a breakfast briefing on Capitol Hill about the Dragonfly mission, which is going to send a rotocraft to Titan, search for life. It's an exciting, daring, bold, brash mission. And it was so popularly attended, I had to go to the catering people and ask for them to line the room with extra chairs for people to come and sit at. And so, and Bill was there. He can fact check me. But the caucus right now, we have 41 members. I'm working to grow it and keep getting it bigger every day. And so we're now on target to work with NASA on doing one later this month about the search for life. And so we're looking at doing an event on November 19th with Jim Green and possibly one of our board members, Heidi Hamill, on the search for life. And so it's just one of those things that we're able to do as an organization. And as Casey said, we're not backed by Lockheed, we're not backed by Boeing, we're not backed by Raytheon, we're backed by you. And we can come in as an honest broker, provide subject matter experts, and convey the majesty and excitement of what is space exploration. And if in Casey, please forgive me, when he was here for IAC, I'm a member of this thing called the Joint Space Task Group at the Pentagon. And we had Casey come in and gave a dazzling briefing about planetary defense, another one of our core mission areas. And we had people from the British Ministry of Defense. We had people from the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Space Development Agency, the NRO, the CIA. I mean, we are reaching out and touching everybody that deals with anything with space. And we appreciate your help, and it's just been a blast. And Casey and I talk all the time on how to keep executing on that. We're a kind of I always say we're kind of a warm and fuzzy for the DC space policy community, And whether it's working with NASA or the Space Council at the White House or the international folks, for example, the French embassy has a new space attaché, and I've been able to develop a relationship with him. When one of the times we had Bill in a few months ago, I brought him in to meet with the Japanese Space Exploration Agency. They have a DC office, and so we reach out and touch more than what you might normally expect, and that deals with the media as well. We deal with the Washington Post, deal with Politico, deal with the BBC. We're out there every day engaging these folks and promoting what we consider our core values that are good for all people. So,
Bill,
Matt,
you like to say space brings out the best in us.
Yes. So can you get that picture up? I think I know the one that Casey's referring to. You have to load his file again, just to show you how many people we had at the caucus, in the caucus meeting. It's cool. People are excited.
I don't know if I've got that one, but I might have to back up a little bit here. Casey, this was your next one.
Whoa.
Go forward about 3 slides, Matt.
I'm trying to back up.
Instead of backing up, go forwarding. Yeah.
Got it.
There you go. I'm going to change microphones, I think.
Is this what you're looking for?
No, one more.
I'm trying this microphone.
One more.
Whoa. Whoa.
I'm trying to do this out of memory. There's one picture. It should be obvious.
Yeah, I can hear you, Bill.
Yeah, good. There's a bunch of people in a picture.
Let me go again.
There's that's Representative Kilmer from my beloved Washington State, and he's the Democrat that's on the committee. Now, I have some questions for the advocacy team, but more importantly, do we have questions from the outside, from our community, from our members?
Well, we do have one that was specific to Casey's comments. And Casey, was when you were talking about the lunar plans, Artemis, which is something I know you want to talk about at more length. But the question that came in is from Max, who said about our plans, or the executive is plans to reach the moon by 2024. He said, really? Isn't the lunar project primarily a political distraction to keep NASA from working on low Earth orbit climate change work?
No.
There.
Okay.
No, well, so we've seen, this is one of the consequences of a growing NASA budget, is that the Earth Science program at NASA has actually fared exceptionally well, better than I would have expected initially with the presidential transition. And while Earth Science has not grown in the last few years, it has maintained what has been a record level of funding at about $1.9 billion. And so no missions have actually been canceled at Earth Science. They're not, again, growing at the same rate as others, but they've maintained a pretty healthy budget slice. You're seeing with the current House budget going through the democratically led House right now, a proposal to increase Earth Science by a few $100 million above that requested level. And they're actually in negotiations right now with the Senate to determine that. So something that Jim Bridenstine, the NASA administrator, has said, to his great credit, his insightful awareness of politics from his congressional time, was that if you're going to succeed in the moon program, you cannot cannibalize NASA programs to do it. And so he has been pushing very hard internally within the White House to secure fundamentally new money for Artemis, and not to commit NASA to going after programs internally, because he knows politically that will mean the end of that effort.
But how much money are we talking
about,
Casey? We're talking about another 20 billion for Artemis?
Over 5 years.
Over 5 years? An extra 4 billion a year?
Yep.
That's an increase of 20% in the NASA budget?
Yep.
That's a lot.
Yeah, we will learn that's, so the seriousness of the White House commitment to this, and Jim Bridenstine's ability to persuade within the White House, will be demonstrated next year when the White House budget request for fiscal year 2021 comes out. So we saw this year an additional supplemental request of billion specifically for the Artemis program after their initial budget request for NASA. So that was new money proposed. Next year, it'll have to be significantly greater than 1.6 billion. It'll have to be something on the order of $3 to $4 billion for it to be a serious effort to return in 2024. And so if we don't see that request, then we know how seriously to take this effort. And if they still try to go after other NASA programs, it will fail because Congress has repeatedly prevented those from being cut.
Now, when you say $1.6 billion requested, that's not the same as $1.6 billion guaranteed to NASA.
No.
Correct.
So did that money ever get over there? And when you say next year, are you talking about February?
So the 1.6 billion was requested for fiscal year 2020. Notably, we began fiscal year 2020 back in October. Congress has not passed those bills yet. And so what we've seen through what Congress has done, the House provided no money. They ignored that request fundamentally for Artemis. The Senate provided kind of a half measure. They gave money for our lunar lander program, but less than requested. And they were overall more supportive, but they had different priorities. And so both House and Senate right now are wrangling to try to decide what a final bill would look like for NASA in 2020. And using that to go forward to vote, hopefully before November 21st, when the current temporary funding measure runs out. So either way, Artemis is not off to a good start for 2024. I would not bet on 2024 as a landing deadline. So we will see again with the next year's budget for 21, which comes out upcoming in February, ideally. We will see how hard the White House will continue to push for it.
It's coming up February 9th, and NASA's already submitted to OMB what they want. And so up until Thanksgiving is when they're going to figure out what the heck the president's going to submit to Congress on February 9th. And that's one of the great things about the Day of Action this year is that we're going to be coming in right on the heels off of that budget submission. And we're going to be first out of the gate, working the hill on that kind of stuff. So we're positioned in a great place in the timing that we're doing this to really make an impact. And don't forget 2020 is an election year, so great.
Has anyone forgot? I don't know.
It's an election year for what?
Casey?
It's a joke, everyone. That's irony. Ha 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 ha.
No,
Casey, slides, by the way, reset to that. You want to continue with those?
I'm meeting with Senate Majority
Brendan?
Leader McConnell's office this week and the House Appropriations Committee this week to get a better read on how this is going to play out in the next several weeks. So I just want to put that out there.
You're meeting with Mitch McConnell.
I've got a great question, Casey. Yeah, from Phillips Burgess, who says, do we have a one-page policy briefing for those of us who can meet with our congressional delegation, but cannot make it to DC in February?
Yes, we will actually be rolling that out in about a week. So we'll have new information and outline basically a way to pledge to take action on the same day, even if you can't come to Washington, DC. And once you pledge, we'll be contacting you with basically the talking points, same sorts of training and background material to prepare in a very similar way to if you were able to go to DC. And part of that too, in advance, we try to be very, in a sense, reactive to the ground situations when we show up in DC. So for some of the talking points, those won't be developed until closer to February, but we can begin to prep on the major issues that are relevant to the society leading up to that. So you're basically ready to go and empowered in the meantime. So yeah, look for that, and we'll send out a message to everyone who is here with that information as soon as that gets posted.
The other thing that's going on right now, we've been talking a lot about the appropriations bills, but there's these authorization bills that really get into the needles of policy, whether it be the Defense Department, the Department of Energy, or NASA and things like that. And we've been waiting for a NASA authorization bill. And I was in communication with the chairman or chairwoman of the House Space Committee, Kendra Horn, today. and they're still working on coughing up a bill very soon, and they're actually going to have an authorization policy hearing very soon, and we're going to be working to inform what goes on at that hearing and what gets into the bill. The Senate's already coughed up their authorization bill with Ted Cruz and Kirsten Sinema. Everyone's kind of waiting to see what the House is going to say. So, I mean, there's other things churning. If you're concerned about really drilling down into policy stuff, the appropriations bills just cough up dollar amounts essentially. The authorization bills, we'll talk about, the rocket has to have red and blue tail fins and stuff like that. It can get that weird. So
it's the details. That's why we have full-time people working on these problems.
yeah.
I got a question from Randy Hughes King, who's with us today. Is there a component of space governance for space manufacturing, space resource acquisition for the Planetary Society advocacy effort? I think he means, what are the rules of the International Space Road, so to speak?
There really is nothing like that. The UN has this thing called the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And I've joked with Casey before that the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space makes the US Senate look like a lean, mean, innovative body. What you're going to have is some sort of legal modality that is essentially like the common heritage of mankind in the oceans. And the oceans are for everybody essentially, and still we can have oil companies set up rigs and drill and extract resources for them. And I think you're going to have something like that. I don't think anyone's going to say that the United States or Russia or China can claim the moon or Mars or anything like that. But you're going to have these private entities, asserting claims, but we haven't. It's a very speculative question, and the law does not like speculating. You need to have a case at hand. You have to have facts at hand, and usually courts will look to analogous situations for the court to make a ruling that makes some logical sense. And I know that was a very wordy, legally nerdy answer, but.
Well, until somebody's out there actually trying to extract resources, there isn't a case to try, and so it's, as you use the word, speculative.
It's moot.
Yeah. If we had
Here's
a rocket with a
question.
giant ice melter, then we'll take a meeting or something like that.
Here's the second question. Oh, by the way, Randy says, excellent answer, Brendan. Philip Spurgis has a second one here. Do we have a position on encouraging NASA to avail itself of private sector efforts? I know that military, Air Force, are actively working to include small businesses in the pipeline for supplying technology without turning those businesses into defense contractors.
Well, yes, short answer is yes, that we do in our human spaceflight principles that are available on our website at planetary.org/space advocacy, or space advocate, I should say. We highlight that particularly for low Earth orbit, finding ways to engage the commercial sector for low Earth orbit activities to enable NASA to go further out. That's one of our core principles that we operate in for human spaceflight. And then I'll let Brendan jump in with a few additional items here. But fundamentally, the way that I see our role with commercial spaceflight is we want NASA to have the ability and the resources to reach the exploration goals that we have for getting people to Mars, getting spacecraft further out into pushing back the frontier of knowledge for humanity, being able to do what it needs to do. And commercial spaceflight is an enabling aspect of that, in that it can provide, in particular demonstrated cases, lower launch costs, faster acquisition and more kind of agile performance within that. To the degree that it enables exploration, we support commercial spaceflight. And then in terms of specific commercial spaceflight policy, we tend to not focus on that as much just because it doesn't directly intersect with our exploration initiatives for finding life, defending the planet, and exploring planets. So Brendan, if you want to jump in on top of that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the contractor, or I should say the industrial base, has actually done a pretty good job of diversifying their supply and component manufacturers across all 50 states. And so there's already kind of baked in, there are states that you would not think of as a space state that have men and women going to work every day making, I always jokingly say making the armrest for the Orion capsule.
NASA's tentacles are everywhere.
Yeah, so you kind of have this pervasive. They're quite smart about it actually, and they're high-paying jobs. They're good jobs, and so the commercial space industrial base, whether they're a subcontractor for Boeing or they're a subcontractor for Blue Origin, they're already out there right now and they're working diligently. And so that's why there's a commercial spaceflight federation, one of our peer competitors to a degree. It's been quite interesting, dealing with the Europeans. They can't fathom the idea of this kind of free market industrial base that we have here in the United States, whereas everything is much more managed and controlled by, Ariane Space or the European Space Agency and things like that.
Or DLR in Germany, right?
Or DLR. And so, if Brendan and Casey want to start up a space company in our garage, there's nothing stopping us. The Japanese, the Europeans, the Russians, the Chinese, the South Koreans, they cannot fathom what we're able to do here in the United States in terms of a commercial space industrial base. And they actually look to us, believe it or not, for inspiration.
I believe it. All right, you guys stand by. I'm going to be right back. Hang on, I'll be right back.
Okay, we'll count on it. Thanks, Bill. We have much more that we can share with you folks in terms of sharing with you everything that these guys, Brendan and Casey primarily, but the society is up to on your behalf and with your support. But I do want to encourage more of you, if you feel like it, chime in with your questions by going to the chat window, which should be open on your screen, or find the little drop down for the chat window. And we would love to hear from you. Casey, just to remind you, I think I've gone back to where we left off with your slides, if you want to pick up there. Here is a question that just came in from Randy Hughes King. What is the total space workforce in the United States? Can you break that out? Because so much of it is smeared across other things like military space and aerospace.
Well, it's a shared workforce. It's a shared industrial base. There's a lot of what we, the United States do on the military and intel side that is just black. It's collectively known as black space, and people aren't even allowed to say really what they do. So it's a very fungible number. NASA's much better about saying they're employing X amount of people. Their contractors are very vociferous about how many people they're employing across all 50 states and things like that. So, but I'm sure Casey's got some great numbers, and I'll defer to him.
Not off the top of my head, though. I'm sorry, you stumped me on the immediate recall. I think, but the point is, though, is that it is kind of smeared across the variety of aerospace aspects. So that at some level, the data collection is hard to kind of nail down. I do know off the top of my head that NASA's entire civil servant workforce is about 17,000 individuals. Contractors probably a multiple of 3, I'd say, as a rough number. And then you have, you know, it depends what you consider part of the workforce, the scientific community, people who get NASA contracts, graduate students. So I'd say add maybe another 10,000 scientists and students across the country. So you're probably talking about, let's say for round numbers here, give or take about 100,000 people directly impacted by the space program, probably more if you include, as Brendan pointed out, the defense and national reconnaissance side of space. Civil space, definitely many tens of thousands.
Well, that kind of leads me into another line of discussion, because you always hear these members of Congress and other people saying, well, you know, space should be inspiring to these kids, and how many kids get inspired by space end up pursuing a career in space? How do we track that? Well, all 50 states and federal law prevent people from tracking what little kids do for a variety of legalistic reasons on finding out what they end up doing. There is a codified protection of these children. You have people in our community saying, well, how, you know, if little Johnny or little Susie is studying, you know, math, how can we tell that little Johnny or little Susie's working at NASA or the NRO or SpaceX or whatever? We're not allowed, we legally can't tell. So it gets to Casey's point, it's very, I keep using this word, fungible. It's very difficult to track. It'd be nice to, you know, put it up there and say, yes, little Johnny and Susie got excited by seeing a space launch, and ergo, they're a rocket scientist. You can't do that. It's very difficult, believe it or not.
Bill, welcome back. I got a point of pride to share with you guys. This is based on the conversation about others around the world looking to the United States, to NASA. And it's from Harry Reinhardt in Columbus, Ohio. Anyone in the world looking to us for inspiration right now is truly refreshing.
Oh, it's beyond a doubt. I cannot tell you how many embassies I go to, how many events I go to, where our friends and allies look to us. They're basically saying, tell us what to do. And Casey and I kind of joke about this. We can't get out of our own way to tell them what to do to a certain degree, what they can bring to the fight. And the Chinese and the Russians are supremely flummoxed about what we are trying to do. I cannot tell you how many times I've had Russians and Chinese come to me and ask me about the X-37B program, or when is the Atlas V going to be retired, because we're not going to need the Russian-built RD-180s. We are still the leaders, not to be jingoistic or arrogant or anything like that. We're still doing good. We're still doing good, and our friends and allies rely on us, and we just need to be good partners.
We have quite a few questions coming in now, guys. And Casey, obviously, if we can, as we approach the hour here, we may be able to get back, if we go into bonus time a little bit, to some of the other things that I know you were hoping, you and Brendan are hoping to share with us. But let me read one of these, and it's from Wayne Spence, who's with GE Aviation, actually. And I think it'll be another one that's easy to answer. He says, do you see any future plans to move Earth science and planetary defense into a different department? And I think he means by this, outside of NASA. He says, i.e., separate NASA from these functions. In fact, you and I have just discussed recently on air and Planetary Radio about how planetary defense has kind of been given a life of its own within NASA.
I was on mute. Yeah, indeed. And it has been discussed throughout the past. It doesn't frankly make a lot of sense when it gets down to the nuts and bolts of it, primarily because NASA has the federal expertise of managing spacecraft for scientific purposes and data dissemination. So that's one of the big reasons we're in planetary defense. It's within NASA, not the Department of Defense, because it requires a broad global engagement with free sharing of information in terms of tracking and finding, characterizing near-Earth objects. Congress amended NASA's, the NASA Act of 1958 to include planetary defense as part of its responsibility for tracking and characterizing near-Earth objects. And the same went for Earth observation and Earth science too. NASA launches the satellites to characterize the Earth's environment. This is very different than NOAA. This kind of been discussed in the past. Maybe we should move Earth science to NOAA. NOAA does weather reporting, and its satellites are notably built and launched by NASA for NOAA. So it's maintaining the expertise in the areas where NASA already has it. And it's just, again, just like planetary defense, NASA's charter functionally basically says that monitoring the Earth and understanding the Earth is part of NASA's responsibility.
And that gets to why.
Okay, guys.
It was great having Casey at the Pentagon, because, as he says, NASA's delegated by law to address this issue. But God forbid we have a problem, it's going to be the Pentagon that's going to have to grapple with that. And Casey gave a great talk to us.
Also, possibly the Department of Energy, if somebody decides that we need to nudge an asteroid with a nuclear weapon. This is quite a thing. But as we remind you, all the money that's spent in space is really spent on Earth. So we just got to manage it.
Here's another one that comes out of what's already been discussed. And I think maybe, Casey, it's a reference to the kind of effort that will be underway in the Day of Action, but beyond that, to what you guys do on an almost daily basis. From Gary Martini, are we able to overlap the space agency industry contribution to a given House member's district or senator's state? In other words, do we plan to show each of their staffers how much it impacts their specific voter bases? Is that part of the message that we bring to their offices?
Absolutely. And it's something that we, as part of the Day of Action, we provide training and worksheets for every participant to do in advance of their meetings, where they basically go through and find NASA's contracted spending in their districts, look for scientific NASA-supported science happening in their areas, small manufacturers and so forth. So that's something we absolutely encourage members of Congress, and actually this is an opportunity to plug Space Advocacy 101, our free online course at courses.planetary.org. It includes that workshop and trains you how to do that yourself too, if you're curious. And we talk about it in that course, and Brendan can add to this, but members of Congress are primarily concerned about being reelected, and they get reelected by keeping their constituents happy, and you keep your constituents happy probably by keeping people employed and keeping the economy good in your district. So they're very parochial, it tends to be, in terms of jobs and impact, economic impact in their districts. And NASA provides a lot of useful tools for finding financial contributions by congressional district throughout the country. And so that's something we absolutely train our members and Day of Advocate participants to do, and something we talk about all the time. And I'd say for planetary defense, we use that in a district in California where it has a small boutique manufacturing company that made the sensors necessary, the very particular type of delicate sensor for infrared radiation. And that sensor line was going to go out of business after James Webb Space Telescope died. And we were able to show that that connected to this near-Earth object surveillance mission telescope. And if that member of Congress was, made them interested suddenly in this planetary defense mission, because it tied to a particular industry teledyne in their district and keeping people employed on that production line. So there's lots of opportunities for that. And that's something we definitely draw that line to.
Here's another question from Phillips Burgess. And Brendan, goes back to what you had to say, that your comment about what can be accomplished by entrepreneurs here in the US holds only until you actually want to launch. Then you need to navigate the alphabet soup of regulatory agencies and fight through an environmental impact statement and much more. If only we could establish a makerspace for space entrepreneurs to actually test their designs, ellipsis, ... obviously, this is something that a lot of people, you mentioned Ted Cruz, have been hoping to simplify, to make it easier for people to commercialize space. Brendan?
Yeah, no, and thanks for the question. Again, this is another space issue that you have Republicans and Democrats wonderfully trying to address in almost a good, not to sound hokey, but a good government way. Um, uh, the Department of Commerce has been designated as kind of now the clearinghouse for addressing exactly what this gentleman brings up. And there was always, it used to be kind of housed at the FAA in their Office of Commercial Spaceflight. And the feeling was that at FAA, space was always going to be the little brother to airline stuff, essentially. And then drones took over as the big issue that had to be addressed. Space was still kind of kept in the background. And so there's been an effort to designate the Department of Commerce as a place where you can, one-stop shop essentially for this gentleman's question, where if he starts up a space company, he can go there. He'll still have to deal with some paperwork and things like that, but it's all one stop. And also, this administration has been saying the Department of Commerce has a shot clock essentially to adjudicate any forms and applications and things like that. So because these people, they have to go to investors, and investors want to be able to see what's my return on investment next quarter, 2 quarters, a year from now, things like that. And to provide some at least predictability is something kind of new right now for the commercial space folks. There was a time I worked for the congressman that had Cape Canaveral in his district at one point, and we would have companies come to us and say, I want to launch out of Cape Canaveral. The Air Force is driving me nuts. NASA's being a jerk. FAA is climbing all over my back. The FCC wants to get on what the heck I'm trying to do. And these well-intentioned startup space companies would just face a litany of, I got to deal with this person, I got to deal with that person, I got to deal with this person, I got to deal with that person. And they just said, the heck with it, the heck with it. The funny one was that there was a space startup company that got so sick of it, they went to Australia to launch out of. They said, we're getting the heck out of the United States. We're going to Australia. You know what happened? The Australian government said, we never had a launcher here. What should we do? They literally photocopied the FAA's launch requirements, dropped it on this company, and the company died. So, not to get on a rant, but
so should we be advocating for streamlining that, we at the Planetary Society? Normally we focused on planetary exploration, spacecraft to planets and the ground systems that support it. Should we be, in our members' view, be working on the relationship between NASA and the FAA and NOAA? And I guess the military, the Army has satellites and so on and so on.
Yeah, I think we can be helpful. I don't think we need to make it a pillar. I like the pillar. But I think it's something that we can be helpful. I think we would find other allies in DC that would rejoice in our participation in aiding and abetting the promotion of entrepreneurial space companies.
But this is definitely on the fringe of our current mission, right?
Yeah.
Well, the word fringe, let's go with border.
Yeah.
Bill, I got one that I think may be more appropriate for you. It's peripherally borders on the advocacy effort. It's another one from Randy Hughes King. What future educational or recruitment projects are in the pipeline at the Planetary Society? Will there be a Light Sail 3 or other engineering effort, a big project like that?
Well, we did not set this up, but this is did we? This is a fabulous question. So our plan, after about the first of the calendar year, about after the start of 2020, we're going to have a competition or a call for papers as to what people, our members and supporters, feel we should be doing next. There is, I can tell you, there is a faction for a Light Sail 3. But we did get, in one example, we got PlanetVac is now in the pipeline for a few. This would be a thing to sample the regolith or the material on the surface of an asteroid or another planetary body and bring it back to Earth using the helium that's stored above the or used above the tanks, a fabulous word, the ullage above the fuel tanks on spacecraft. That got accepted, this system that we messed around with for the last few years, with your support, got accepted on a future NASA mission. So we're going to have the expression I'm using is call for papers, but we're going to ask what you all think we should be working on next. And believe me, yes, there is a strong faction of Light Sail 3 supporters, but we'll talk about that after the first of the year when the convergence of our 5-year strategic framework and our funding, when those two things come together. So it's going to be, and also next year is the 40th anniversary of the Planetary Society. As you know, I'm a charter member. I joined in the spring of 1980. So we are very excited about the future. That's an excellent question, and just stay tuned for the next 7 weeks or so, and we'll give you an earful. An eyeful, a web page full.
Yeah, don't count us out. Max Fritzler, who we've already heard from. Let's go to Mars. We need the defining vision. We like Mars. Others are put off by the desert landscape there. Others are put off by the dead moon. How can we articulate the vision of the solar system as the new frontier? We need to do this in a way that is absolutely a part of the ordinary person's mental background, like we need good healthcare for all. I guess, yeah, wouldn't it be great if we thought of, we could get people to think of space exploration the way they think of staying healthy.
Well, this is a fabulous point. Just keep in mind that getting to Mars is such a more difficult problem than going to the moon. And you guys, Casey and Brendan, can talk about this, but going to the moon with the Apollo program was a Cold War thing. So it was part of everybody's conscience, to your point. It was part of what everybody was thinking about. And then along that line, I mean, rather separately, is NASA remains the best brand the United States has. So we're not going to have the same 10 times the NASA budget effort we had during the Cold War, but we want to make it, we want it so that NASA is part of everybody's everyday thinking. So what I would say in short is that's what we do, is try to make space exploration part of everybody's everyday thinking. And space exploration writ large, exploring atmospheres on distant exoplanets, looking for methane or some other gas that might indicate there's a living thing out there. The search for living things here in the solar, something alive or evidence of something that was once alive on another world here in the solar system, I think is a profound effort that could literally change the course of human history. I don't mean literally in the figurative sense. It would change the way everybody thinks about being a living thing in the cosmos. And then the third thing that's just very compelling is you don't want to get hit with an asteroid and invade ancient dinosaurs. So that is clearly, that third one, planetary defense, is clearly on everyone's mind in a way that it didn't used to be. You'll see advertisements for all sorts of consumer products that involve jokes or references to ancient dinosaurs going extinct because of an asteroid impact. And that is a result of a global effort from our organization and other organizations to raise awareness of the discoveries regarding asteroids hitting the Earth. So along that line, I strongly believe we're starting to have it accepted that there's a reasonable chance there's life on other worlds, and it's a worthy use of our intellectual treasure to look for it. So that's what we do here at the Planetary Society, and I'm very proud of it. But that you're asking the question indicates that there's a lot more to do. So thanks.
Brendan, before you jump in, because I can see that you want to, we have been warned that apparently we're getting some echo, Bill, when you speak, and so the others of us may need to mute our microphones when we're not speaking, or at least when you are, Bill. So keep that in mind, colleagues. Brendan?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, the congressman I worked for, he was a medical doctor, and he and I would talk about humans to Mars, and he said it's not an engineering challenge. He viewed it as a physiological challenge, and you know, we've sent things to Mars numerous times. They're robots. Clearly, they're not people. The challenge is us. And one of the things Casey and I've been talking about and working on is, you know, planetary protection and things like that. So we know how to send things to Mars and land them safely. The people that are the challenge, I guess, is all I wanted to say on that.
Gentlemen, we've got a couple of other questions here, but I think they may be better saved for a few minutes. And Casey, I wanted to see if you want to continue, because I know you had other things that you definitely wanted to share.
Well, why don't we, in the last few minutes here, why don't we bring up what we're looking forward to in the next few months and for next year? I have a few slides for those, Matt, towards the end. You can click through. It should be straightforward, but I'd say we can break it down into some near-term issues and long-term being the next few years, or even beyond that. But the near term is getting this current budget passed. And frankly, we're all kind of along for the ride for this. So we haven't really addressed it yet, but there is obviously the impeachment inquiry going on in the House of Representatives now. That's combined with something like 20 days of congressional activity left in their schedule for this calendar year before Christmas, and a variety of other holidays start piling up. Not a lot of time for legislating. Not a lot of time to finish NASA's budget, which is right now, if you go forward a few slides, Matt, in the process of what's called conference committees. So the House and the Senate have each passed by their full vote of each chamber a budget for, it's the timeline. It's the gray timeline backgrounds. If you keep clicking forward, there it is. The budget is pretty far along for fiscal year 2020. Again, it's passed the floor vote in both the House and the Senate. They're different bills. They need to be reconciled together. So if you hit once more, Matt, this means they're in conference committee. They're trying to hammer out the differences between the two of them right now. And ultimately, they will both have to go back to the House and Senate in order to vote on those and then be signed by the president. This is part of a larger bill called Commerce, Justice, and Science. So it's not just NASA. It includes things like the Commerce Department, which includes things like the census. And these are all unrelated political issues. NASA isn't going to be the source of most of this debate. It's going to be this other stuff. And so there's not much at this point we can do about this beyond encouraging our members of Congress to get their, to do their jobs effectively, even in the context of these larger partisan divides. So we have right now until November 21st. That's when our current basically stopgap temporary spending measure runs out. And if we hit that point, and without a new budget for NASA, NASA will either be shut down along with other parts of the federal government, or they may pass another temporary stopgap measure. Neither is great for NASA. Particularly, it's very not good for, let's say just bad for Artemis landing on 2024. If we have another stopgap, it's okay for most of our other priorities because they're already approved and funded for the large part. It's not ideal, but not a disaster. So finishing this budget for 2020 is going to be in our following very closely. We'll be writing and talking about that on our website and on Space Policy Edition. The other issues, Matt, if you go forward another slide or two, we have a few listed items here. Yeah, there we go. We mentioned this already earlier. Bill brought this up, at this idea of trying to maintain programmatic balance in NASA while pursuing an accelerated lunar landing program. We need to preserve NASA's broad portfolio in addition to going to the moon. The other long-term worry that I'm growing more concerned about is that NASA is writing a lot of checks, or Congress is writing checks. Everyone's telling NASA to begin programs right now. This is great, it's exciting. That means a lot of these we're committing to right now a larger NASA budget in the next few years. It's easy and cheaper to start something, but after a few years in most aerospace projects, the budget requirements grow significantly. So we're effectively requiring NASA's budget to grow with no guarantee that it will. So that's going to be an issue tracking going forward. And then of course, as we mentioned like that, there's a presidential election next year, and managing a potential White House transition in 21, or again, maintaining our current relationship now, we're going to be tracking and following that very closely. We'll be having more resources available online as the months progress in the election to help share what the range of options are for space policy as we understand it going forward for both the Democratic primary candidates and also the current administration. And then longer term, again, for those in the know, the Planetary Science Decadal Survey, which basically the community official recommendation for what to explore in our solar system for the decade between 2023 and 2032. That report will begin next year, and that will be very influential, a critical report for many of our priorities, so we're going to be following that as well. So those are just some of the highlights that we're going to be following, basically from most immediate to most far out.
Okay, I'll stop sharing my screen here. Thank you, Casey. Here's a comment from Philip Spurgis. I support the current triplet of broad policy objectives that the Planetary Society has stated, but there are myriad strategies that we could advocate to support those objectives. Casey is correct on keeping NASA focused farther out than LEO, but LEO, low Earth orbit, is where the platforms will be built to get farther out. Not sure about that. NASA also needs to create the shared platforms that can't be or shouldn't be created and owned by a single entity, be it a corporation or a branch of the military. I was thinking of the Lunar Gateway, of course, Casey, but your comments?
Yeah, that's true. And I think this is why we have at this, broad programmatic goals like this that help us keep focused when we have a changing and dynamic field to be working in, that help guide what we prioritize. As you notice here, you're looking at the entire Planetary Society advocacy and policy team plus 2 additional people. So we have to be able to prioritize our programmatic goals while adapting to a rapidly changing reality out there. So we do the best we can. Again, we're enabled by the resource that you provide us to be able to do this. And that will just kind of naturally limit what we can do to be reactive or to what we can focus on more broadly beyond our core enterprises. In addition to that, I think the question that always comes back to me on the policy side, and Brendan on the advocacy and also just the Washington operations side, is when you're trying to balance a large coalition of supporters, and this is what NASA generally has. A lot of people like NASA, but when it gets down to brass tacks, what do you actually do with it? You have to keep your coalition together. And so there's a pragmatic reality that's worth engaging in to build a strong coalition. And how one uses that coalition and uses the pragmatism of how do we keep jobs, how do we keep people happy, how do we keep programs afloat that make sense while not just wasting our time and spinning our wheels. To me, that's the ultimate question. How do we make this system that we have more efficient and more focused and more productive without having to basically create a revolution in terms of how we and NASA itself is politically supported? That is a less, in some ways, exciting, but definitely more, I think, realistic and productive approach to policy that really drives me and drives us here at the Society. And this is what we're going to have to be working forward. How do we leverage what NASA has, where it is, what people are interested in to provide the outcomes that we want for space exploration? And so being able to leverage things like an interest in the moon, there was actually a really good example of this. How did Planetary Defense get to raise its budget by 4,000% functionally, actually, to have a mission flight line to be able to launch spacecraft? It's because it happened to align with a brief attention of human spaceflight program for sending humans to near Earth objects. So being able to leverage changing political winds to support the values that we have as it goes on is a very useful way to build up programmatic capability over time. And that is a very smart way, I believe, to operate when you're a lean organization like the Planetary Society. And that's something that we'll be looking forward going in the next few years of how to engage, particularly again, things like commercial space, to enable the type of long-range exploration and leverage things like low Earth orbit in order to, again, provide these outcomes that will really excite us at a deep and profound level.
If I may add.
Yes, of course. Sorry, I forgot to unmute.
Yeah. Casey really kind of encapsulated the political balance we need to maintain. Recently, we had basically a Mexican standoff between Johnson and Marshall Space Flight Center over who had authority of different parts of Artemis and things like that. And Jim Bridenstine, the White House, had to manage the Alabama delegation and the Texas delegation to make sure everyone was happy. Back in 2016, when I was with Space Foundation, we worked to try to come up with a kind of a mom and apple pie, space is good for America kind of document and provide all the political campaigns. That was like root canal for me because I one night I came home, I was like, okay, I think I'm doing a good job with this. I got a phone call from a certain major aerospace and defense contractor friend of mine, call me up and say, I've seen the draft of what you guys are working on, and essentially accused me of being a shell for SpaceX. They tried to sabotage it from 6 ways to Sunday. And the politics of space is really not Republican and Democrat, believe it or not. It's regional and it's corporate.
Yeah. Hey, you guys, I should press on.
Bill, I know. Yeah, Bill, I know you have to run, and we are almost out of time regardless. There is one other question here, which is definitely not within our normal agenda, Bill, but it's specific to you if you can handle this before you take off. And it comes from Wayne Spence of GE Aviation. Clearly, based on your incredible career, you can put your energy into many places, and you do. So what pointed you to the Planetary Society as one of these?
Oh man, understand, I took one class from Carl Sagan. And so the guy was all that, as the kids say. He was inspirational. And I'll just tell you something that made quite an impression on me was what he called comparative planetology, which is a phrase I guess he made up, where you compare the climates of Venus with Mars with the Earth. And you see how much there is to be learned by exploring other worlds. And then I got quite charmed, as a guy who grew up reading science fiction and grew up with Star Trek, literally, and all the other, there was a whole spate of space exploration or space adventure television shows when I was young. I got quite charmed by the idea of looking for life on another world, and I still am. And then when I was out in the workforce making a living, people discovered the crater impact off Chicxulub, Mexico, the layer of iridium around the world that's almost certainly a result of that impact, and the profound effect it had on living things, including you and me. So this is my passion. This is what I'm into, is understanding the cosmos and our place within it. That's why I'm here. And I'm honored to serve as your CEO. We're just trying to change the world here, as I like to say. We're trying to leave the world better than we found it. And as we've alluded to, I believe, if not directly, indirectly, 35 times during this last hour, space brings people together. People that don't get along about anything else. I mean, pick how much tax you pay, states' rights versus federal rights, international cooperation, international waters, the space treaty on on other bodies, and the moon especially, and other asteroids. All this stuff brings people together rather than gets them to disagree. And so this is really what I want to be involved in. I want to explore the worlds, find life, search for life, and not get hit with an asteroid. Let's go, people. And this really all started when I was in college. And bear in mind, my father, I may have talked about, my parents were big science people, and my father was quite the amateur astronomer. I mean, he knew his way around the sky, and so I grew up with it.
Thank you, Bill. That's a great close from you. We'll let you check out if you need to, and just thank you for being a part of this fall 2019 advocacy update. But
Yes.
Brendan and Casey, if you can stick around, I'd love for you to have a chance to make some closing comments, but also tell people the best ways for them to continue to stay informed about our activities.
Oh, there's one thing I should say. When I was talking about our call, what I call call for papers or call for proposals, we're imagining that this will be the professional space community. Not just, it will be people who have some expertise in this area, but I think that'll sort itself out just fine. And we will do our member surveys. Member surveys, by the way, is what led to LightSail in the first place. And so not Cosmos 1 so much, but the follow-on missions, LightSail 1 and 2, was really through our member surveys. So I'm excited about the future, guys. The Planetary Society is growing thanks to your support, and advocacy is a huge part of what we do. This is if you want to change the world, if you want to affect humankind's future and humankind's future in space exploration, advocacy is just an enormous part of it. So thank you all so much. Let's get out there and change the world. Carry on.
Thank you, Bill. Gentlemen, Brendan, how would you like to wrap up? And anything else you want to say to our supporters of the advocacy effort?
Well, I just want to thank everyone for their support. We wouldn't be here without you. There was a reference earlier to our 40th anniversary coming up. I'm going to be working on getting official congressional resolutions enacted that acknowledges our 40th anniversary.
Great. Casey, you got the last word.
Thank you. Always a real treat, not just to be with my colleagues here, but answering your questions and engaging with you. Every time that I meet with our members, whether it's in person or online, and have a chance to hear your interesting feedback and thoughts and ideas, it's not just fun, it's invigorating for me. And it reminds me about how special this organization is, and just how fascinating, what types of people are just drawn to it, of all ages, of all types of backgrounds, but sharing that common commitment and common joy of exploration and discovery. And this type of work that we do, it can be disappointing and frustrating. We're in a very good position now where things have been going really well, but it's not always going to be that way, and it hasn't been that way. And so seeing and developing these relationships with our members is the one consistent positive aspect of doing this job. And that community that we build together at the Planetary Society, I think, is one of its finest benefits to all of us. And so like you say, Matt, don't just work for the Planetary Society. I'm a member myself and have been a member for a long time. And being able to do this is one of the great privileges in my life. And it's something that I get to share with people and build this type of not just space fans, but really turning people into space advocates. And that aspect of advocacy, it's not just getting involved in something that you know, a lot of people have a distaste for politics, but really when they start to participate through space, they see how representative our representative governments actually can be. And you are represented when people hear you, and they hear you when you speak to them. And if you don't end up speaking to them, they won't know what you're saying, and someone else will be talking to them about this topic, and you have no idea what they're saying, and you may not like what they're saying. And so we're in a constant, in a sense, battle for the awareness and attention for the people who represent us in the federal government. And by maintaining this sort of active daily engagement that Brendan does, and setting our broad policy and ideas, and getting members to talk to their constituents, or their constituents to talk to their members of Congress, I should say, those are critical things that we do. And so every time we ask you to take action, and you take action, you're participating and making an actual difference, and never forget that. And so our day of action, whether you can come to DC, is the best thing you can do, or pledge to take action from where you are, which is also a wonderful thing to do. That is not just wasting your time. We respect that, and we only ask you to do that when it does make a difference. And so it's one of these things, again, I love taking these questions, love talking to you guys, and anytime you want to contact us, we're all online because we are fundamentally responsive to you. So thank you for your support, enabling us to do this strange and wonderful profession on your behalf. And I hope to talk to you all again very soon.
Thank you, Casey. Thank you, Brendan. And you guys make us proud. And we are very proud to have the support of all of you who are watching today, and the thousands of others who are part of the Planetary Society and share our belief in what the Society is attempting to do to further space exploration for all humankind. Thanks very much also for joining us here today. And for those of you saying thank you in the chat room, you are most welcome. This is why we're here. Hope that you will tune in to Planetary Radio, and especially Planetary Radio's Space Policy Edition. And also, of course, keep visiting planetary.org. Follow us on social media, where you can keep track of all the other great work that is underway by Brendan, by Casey, by Bill, and all of our other colleagues here at the Society as we continue to do your bidding and get us out there into the solar system and beyond. Thanks so much. I'm Matt Kaplan, the host of Planetary Radio. We will see you again with another one of these events, I believe, in about 6 months, in the spring of 2020. Till then, stay healthy and keep looking up. Bye-bye.